Austrian Audio is a fairly new brand that sprang out of AKG in Austria. Since their creation in 2017, Austrian Audio has released product after product, including headphones and microphones, and many more things to come. Austrian Audio even has audio plugins for one of their microphones. It's obvious this company has kept busy. Austrian Audio makes the Hi-X15 and X15, two of the most revealing, detail-oriented headphones I have ever heard. In fact, these two headphones provide far more detail and analytical dissection of your music than any other headphone I have heard under $1,000. Now, these headphones aren't for everyone, but they are incredibly unique. Recently, Austrian Audio released two new headphones, the X15 and the X25BT. I recently reviewed the X15. Today, we will scrutinize the X25BT. This is a $180 Bluetooth headphone. What could possibly compel people to spend nearly $200 on this product? Austrian Audio claims that the X25 is a professional wireless over-ear headphone. The emphasis is on the word professional. This, of course, is not necessarily a new concept. After all, Audio-Technica has the M50XBT and V-Moda has their M200 ANC Bluetooth headphones. Austrian Audio says the X25 is a, quote, pro-level hybrid, end quote, which allows you to connect through analog 3.5mm or digitally through USB-C and Bluetooth. The X25 uses the company's patented high excursion drivers, the same types that are used in the other Austrian Audio headphones. Austrian Audio doesn't provide any information about the sound signature or performance of the X25. However, they do say that this headphone is perfect for enjoying music, working in the studio, or for casual use. If you've watched my other Austrian Audio reviews, then you should have a good sense about the typical construction. Austrian Audio makes unique-looking, unique-feeling, and uniquely built headphones. Their overall design is similar across the entire range. The X25 looks similar to the X15. There's a healthy dose of plastic in the construction. The ear cups and most of the headband are plastic. However, the yoke is metal, as is the underlying headband structure. The hinges that allow the horizontal movement are also metal. The X25 is well padded. The ear pads are made of memory foam and are quite deep. The ear pads are replaceable, but the replacement mechanism is different. There's a section of the instruction manual dedicated to just this. Essentially, you have to pull out the ear pad insert first, then loosen 4 screws, which then pops the ear cups housing apart, allowing you to take the ear pads off. Once you put your ear pads back on, you have to reverse the process. Austrian Audio told me that they're very proud of this mechanism. I have to admit, it's, as I said, different. But I just can't help but think that it is over-engineered. For a simple ear pad replacement, you have to go through multiple steps, all requiring more time than it really should. I've never understood why companies overcomplicate a simple concept like taking ear pads on and off. Audeze glues their ear pads on, which is downright annoying. Avantone requires you to essentially dismantle their MP1 before you can replace the ear pads on that headphone. Beyerdynamic has their teeny tiny notch that requires you to guide the ear pads through it. The Head Audio headphone has an obnoxious string you have to take out and then put back on. But Austrian Audio's design on the X25BT has to be the most complicated I have yet witnessed. I just don't understand why it had to be. Anyway, the headband is also well padded. It seems to have memory foam. The headphone comes with the standard Austrian Audio carrying bag and 2 cables. One is a USB-C cable and the other is a USB-C to 3.5mm cable. As the marketing says, the X25 can be connected through Bluetooth 3.5mm or just USB-C. Theoretically, this means you don't necessarily need a dongle DAC to connect to your mobile device as long as your mobile device has USB-C support. The X25BT continues the Austrian Audio tradition of comfort. The clamp is about average. The ear pads sit fully around my ears, resulting in very good passive noise isolation. The ear pads are soft and mitigate any long-term discomfort. The headphone is fairly light as well. All of this means that I can wear the X25 easily for 3 to 4 hours without needing a break. Overall, the X25BT has good construction. To be honest, Bluetooth headphones costing $200 or more are rarely built with significant amounts of metal, so I'm not particularly surprised with regards to the X25. However, this headphone does have a sturdy build. The plastic is dense, and the headphone does not squeak or rattle. The X25's comfort and accessories are quite good. However, if there's one critique, then it must be the earpad replacement system. It's unnecessarily complicated. I tested the X25BT using numerous devices. This includes my RME 80i2 DAC, the Matrix Mini-i Pro 3, my Modi Liquid Spark stack, and the Sony NW-ZX507. I use the stock accessories. I listened to my test playlist on Amazon Music HD. For the initial sound test, I used the stock USB-C to 3.5mm cable. We will talk about the digital connections later. The X25BT is very easy to drive. You don't need an amplifier. If you've still got a phone with a headphone jack, you can plug the X25 in without worrying about power. If you choose to use an amp, then a modestly powerful one will be plenty. Austrian Audio says nothing about the X25BT's bass response. My tests indicate that this headphone has a sub-bass roll-off, but a close to neutral mid-bass. In Mountains by Hans Zimmer, the X25 did present the sub-bass at the very beginning. However, transients was fast, almost as fast as with planar magnetic headphones. Reverberation was also similarly quick. When the crescendo hit, the organ cut through the other instruments. The rolling thunder effect was audible, but a little underemphasized. When the vocals chimed in, they started from the back until they were about one step ahead of the instruments. In Conquered by Overwork, there's a rolling marble sound at the beginning, and this is supposed to pan from right to left to center. The X25 did clearly present the sound of rolling marbles, but the panning was not particularly apparent. There are multiple drums in this track, and the X25 rendered all of them clearly. The drum impacts were hard, though not quite as much as with the neutral Allo Audio S4X. I listened to several hip-hop songs including Pure Water, Reel It In, Uproar, and Youp Attack. On each occasion, the sub-bass was not fully presented. It sounded like the subwoofer was at the far side of a large room. The drums were louder and seemed to retain their hard impact. Vocals were 2 steps ahead of instruments. I listened to my Sicario playlist. I used these songs to determine if I could hear any bass distortion. The X25 did not distort at any point, from low to excessive volumes. Overall, the X25BT has a sub-bass roll-off. This is typical for Austrian Audio headphones. Mid-bass, however, seems to be close to neutral. Separation between sub-bass and mid-bass is rather good, allowing clarity in this region. Austrian Audio says nothing about the mids performance of the X25BT. My tests indicate that this headphone has forward mids with sibilant vocals. In Orla Gartland's song Why Am I Like This, there's natural vocal grain and sibilants mixed into the track. The X25 exaggerated both. Both were elevated by several decibels and reminded me a lot of the HD560S. The timbre of instruments seemed accurate, however. There was clear separation among all elements. I could concentrate on the vocals, drums, or guitar without difficulty, as there was minimal melding among all of these instruments and their notes. In Want You Back by Haim, the X25 again accentuated female vocal sibilants. It was similar to that of the HD560S. At 8 seconds into the song, the primary singer says the word "we" and drags it out, making it sound gravelly. The X25 clearly presented this detail. There are 2 backup vocalists, one in the left and the other in the right ear cups. The X25 kept all 3 voices separate and distinct. These voices were clear and separate even when all the instruments played at maximum. All instruments were separated and had very little melding among them. In Superposition by Young the Giant, the X25 properly rendered the ukulele and drums. The bass, however, seemed a little distant. The primary male vocalist sibilance was slightly elevated, and nothing to the extent of female vocals. There's a backup vocalist whose voice is layered beneath the primaries. Most headphones and IEMs I've tested cannot reveal this detail. The X25 was just barely able to present the 2 voices. There are sharp intakes of breaths between 1 minute and 10 and 1 minute and 20 seconds. The X25 clearly rendered this detail. Overall, the X25BT has forward mids. Female vocals will receive a push in vocal grain and sibilants. Male vocals will get a slight emphasis in vocal sibilants. There is very good clarity in the mids region, allowing you to hear various elements with little difficulty. Timbre seems accurate. Austrian Audio says nothing about the X25BT's treble response. My test showed that this headphone has a treble emphasis in the upper treble region. In Scherzo for X-Wings, the X25 clearly recreated the brass and horns. However, their higher pitched notes were audibly overemphasized, probably by a few decibels. When I compared against my neutral Avantone planar, the difference was obvious. The Yellow S4X has a slight elevation in treble, and when compared to the X25, seemed to have just a tiny bit less emphasis, but not by much. I could hear the various group sets without difficulty. The timpani was audible but underemphasized. The X25 has width, but no depth or verticality. In other words, instruments appear further or closer in the wings, but sounds never appear above, below, or layered like in an orchestra arrangement. In Flight from the City, the X25 made the piano sound like it was about 8 feet away. Its bassier notes were not fully rendered and had fast transients. I could obviously hear the electric buzzing sound, the pops and sizzles, throughout the track. Cellos sounded clear and smooth and only marginally melded with the piano. I could hear the creaking of wood on the pianist's bench and the shifting of the cello's weight. In Take 5 with the Dave Brubeck Quartet, the X25 presented the piano in the right, drums in the left, saxophone center, and the bass behind, somewhat muted. The saxophone was about one step ahead of the other instruments and remained clear. In fact, all instruments were distinct and had little melding among each other. The saxophone's higher notes were elevated and slightly more than what I heard on the Allo S4X. The cymbals are struck at different spots, which should present slightly different tonalities. The X25 did recreate this minute detail. Overall, the X25BT has clear treble. However, there is an elevation in the upper treble region. It's not harsh or piercing, but fairly obvious, I think. There's no information about the type of details we should hear on the X25BT. However, my tests indicate that this headphone easily provides well above average detail retrieval. The X25 is clear, if nothing else. There's very good separation among all elements in a mix. There's little melding between instruments or vocalists. This means you can hear obvious details along with the more subtle. Pops and sizzles, electric buzzing, creaking of wood, shifting of a cello, multiple vocalists, sharp intakes of breath, twangs of guitar strings, varying tonalities of cymbal strikes. All of these types of details are easily audible on the X25. For a more quantitative test, I used the song New Light by Kazuki. This track has layers of details, including the sound of children playing, wind, rustling of grass, synth, piano, and footsteps. I count the number of footsteps I can hear in the first 60 seconds. The Sennheiser HD800S presents 22 footsteps. The Focal Clear, 18. The Austrian Audio Hi-X15 presents 16 to 17 footsteps. The X15 presents 16. The X15 presents 13 to 14 footsteps. The Hi-Fi Man Sundara, Avantone Planar, Sifka Phoenix, and the Beyerdynamic DT1990 each present about 10 to 11 footsteps. The Monolith M1070, M1570, Sifka Robin, and the Ultrasone Pro 1480i all provide 8 to 9. The audeze LCD2 Closed and the LCD2 Classic each provide 7 to 8. The older M1060C provides about 7 footsteps. The audeze LCD1 and the HD6XX present 6 to 7 footsteps. The Neumann ND-H20 presents 5 to 6 footsteps. The X25BT rendered 13 to 14 clear footsteps. I use the HD6XX and the LCD1 as the mark for average test performance. Any headphones that present more or less footsteps is judged accordingly. In this case, the X25 is well above average in detail retrieval. Its ability is similar to that of other Austrian audio headphones, particularly the X15. People think that open-back headphones naturally have wider soundstage than closed-back headphones. I'm not convinced that's a hard and fast rule. In fact, there are varying degrees of soundstage among headphones. Some closed-back headphones' soundstage is wider than some open-back headphones, for example. With respect to the X25BT, I believe it has above-average soundstage. It is wider than some open-back headphones you might have heard of. Just as with my detail test, I have a scale for soundstage. I use the HD6XX and the LCD1 as my average benchmark and judge other headphones accordingly. The audeze Mobius and all Beats headphones have claustrophobic soundstage. The ND-H20 and the ATH-M60X have below average soundstage. The HD6XX and the LCD1 have, of course, average soundstage. The Sifka Phoenix, Emotiva GR1, and the Ultrasone Pro 1480i have average to maybe above average soundstage, depending on the particular recording. The Hi-Fi Mansandara, Avantone Planar, Austrian Audio Hi-X15 and X65, and the LCD2 Classic have above-average soundstage. The Hi-Fi Mandiva has wide soundstage, and the HD800S has super-wide soundstage. The X25BT has soundstage that is wider than that of the LCD1 and the HD6XX, but it's not quite as wide as the Hi-Fi Mansandara. Let's not mince words. We know as a fact that Austrian Audio headphones have an analytical tuning. I have said this from the very first Austrian Audio headphone that I reviewed, and this was confirmed when I interviewed Austrian Audio CEO. Anybody who purchases one of these headphones expecting a traditional sound signature really has no one to blame but themselves, or a reviewer who's saying otherwise. Austrian Audio headphones will reveal imperfections and harshness in your recordings, stuff that can get glossed over using typical headphones. The X25BT has a sub-bass roll-off but a close to neutral mid-bass. There's good separation between sub-bass and mid-bass and very good clarity in the bass. There's minimal bass bleed into the mids. The mids are forward, vocals are sibilant. If your recordings have vocal grain and sibilance mixed in, the X25 will indeed reveal those details whether you like it or not. Timbre of instruments seems correct. There's very good separation among all mid-centric instruments. Treble seems close to neutral all the way until about the upper treble region. That's where there is an emphasis. This spike is slightly greater than that of the Allo Audio S4X. However, the X25 never sounds harsh or piercing with respect to treble. This headphone presents well above average detail retrieval and clarity. Its soundstage is also above average. All of this results in an analytical tool used to dissect your music. If that's not how you want to listen, then you have plenty of alternative options. I think reviewers should conduct comparisons of gear every time they review anything. That is the only way to know where a new product fits and whether it might be right for you. Here, we will compare the X25BT against the Hi-X15, the Hi-X55, and the Beyerdynamic DT1990. For this comparison, I used the stock accessories. I plugged each headphone into a passive AB switch. That switch was plugged into my Army ADI2 DAC. I tried to volume match. I listened to my test playlist on Amazon Music HD. The X15 and X25BT appear to have very similar bass response. At times, I thought that the X15 might have slightly greater sub-bass emphasis, but this was not consistent. After repeated tests going back and forth between these headphones, I really cannot say there is any material difference in bass response between the two. Clarity and separation seem to be identical in this region between the X15 and the X25BT. The mids also sound identical on the X15 and the X25. Both headphones appear to have the same amount of emphasis in vocal grain and sibilance. Both have the same placement of vocals. Both have the same amount of clarity and separation. Unsurprisingly, the treble response was identical on the X15 and the X25. There were no material differences that I could hear. Both headphones had the same treble emphasis, same clarity, same separation, same placement. Both headphones, yet again, have the same amount and type of detail retrieval and the same soundstage. The X55 has slightly less sub-bass presence than the X25BT. It also has faster transients than the X25. Separation of sub-bass from mid-bass is greater on the X55. Mid-bass impact is very similar, but drum strikes have a sharper sound on the X55. The X55 has noticeably greater clarity in the bass region. The mids are a little different between these headphones. Both the X25 and the X55 accentuate vocal sibilance and grain. It appears to be about the same amount of emphasis. However, there is greater separation of all mid-centric elements on the X55. Vocals, in comparison, are more intimate on the X25. The X55 has greater clarity. Both headphones have forward mids. Both headphones seem to accentuate treble in a similar way. Both have an emphasis in the upper treble region, and I think it's about to the same degrees. The X25 renders treble instruments more intimately. The X55 has greater separation and clarity. The X55 has noticeably wider soundstage and greater detail retrieval. The DT1990 seems to have very similar bass rendition compared to the X25. Both have a sub-bass roll-off, and it appears to be to a similar degree. Overall clarity in the bass region is marginally more obvious on the DT1990. Separation of sub-bass from mid-bass is similar, but the 1990 has just a tiny bit more of it. Mid-bass impact is a little bit harder and sharper on the X25. The mids are similar, but not exactly the same. Both headphones emphasize vocal grain and sibilants. The X25 appeared to have just a tiny bit more of both details. Vocals are forward on both headphones. However, the X25 separates vocals from instruments a little bit more clearly. The treble is similar. Both headphones accentuate this area, but the 1990 has slightly greater push in the upper treble region. The X25 has a little bit more separation among treble instruments. The DT1990 has marginally wider soundstage, but the X25 has greater and clearer detail retrieval. Overall, comparisons like these help determine how headphones perform in relation to each other. Here, it is clear that the X15 and the X25BT have identical or nearly identical performance. They sound the same to me. The X55 has a more analytical signature than that of the X15 and the X25. The X55 has wider soundstage, more detail, greater separation of instruments. The DT1990 does not sound identical to the X25BT, but there are similarities. Both headphones have similar bass response, similar mids, and marginally different treble. When it comes to dissecting your music, the Austrian audio headphones are a unique tool. They may not be to your liking, just like any other headphone. The X25BT can be connected using USB and Bluetooth. This means that the X25 should have an internal DAC or processor to convert digital to analog. Connecting is as blatantly obvious as you might think. There's no difficulty in pairing with Bluetooth. Connecting via USB was simple for Windows, Mac, Android, and iOS. Just plug the thing in. The headphones must be turned on for use in USB mode. If you start with the headphones on, just press the power button until you hear the power on notification. To activate Bluetooth, keep the power button pressed until you're in Bluetooth mode. Since I do not have a second X25 to compare with, I can only give you my general impressions about the audio quality between USB and analog connection. For the analog comparison, I plugged the provided 3.5mm cable into my RME-80i2 DAC. I noticed that there was little to no difference in the bass response. I could not hear any obvious alteration in bass emphasis, clarity, or detail between the USB and the analog modes. Regarding the mids, I thought that the USB mode might have resulted in slightly more neutral vocal grain, but that could just be my imagination. Vocal sibilants appeared to be the same, however. Clarity and separation was more obvious through the analog connection. Vocals also seemed to stand out a little bit more from instruments through the analog connection. Treble response appeared to be similar between USB and analog connection. Both provided a similar type of emphasis in the upper treble region. However, I could hear more clarity and separation through the analog connection. Overall, detail was a little easier to perceive through the analog connection. While listening to New Light, I heard 9 footsteps through the USB connection. Soundstage was the same irrespective of which connection mode I used. My general takeaway is that the USB connection does not allow the drivers in the X25BT to function at their peak. Of course, I was also relying upon the RME-80i2 DAC, which is a professional-grade amp DAC, so I can't say that your experience will be necessarily the same as mine. And, of course, since I could not conduct a true A/B test and had to rely upon switching cables as quickly as possible, my results are prone to error. Now, let's talk briefly about the Bluetooth connection. There was a fairly obvious difference between Bluetooth and analog connection. Bluetooth provided noticeably less clarity and detail. Separation of all elements was less obvious. Vocal grain was essentially non-existent in wireless mode. Vocal sibilance was reduced closer to neutral when compared to the analog connection. The treble emphasis was also somewhat reduced closer to neutral. I heard 7 clear footsteps through the Bluetooth connection during my New Light test. There is no doubt that the Bluetooth connection provided less clarity and detail compared to the wired connections. I will be forthright. Bluetooth, irrespective of which codec you use, is not high resolution. It is a lossy connection. All the marketing you read regarding aptX HD and LDAC is just that, marketing. Our devices constantly decide bandwidth and resolution to maintain the strongest connection. If you think your devices are always connected to aptX HD or LDAC, you're in for a big surprise. Anyway, I listened for any differences between the wired and wireless modes on the X25BT. The Bluetooth connection was noticeably different in sound signature than the analog connection. Even the USB connection sounded different compared to the Bluetooth. I checked the specs on Austrian Audio's website, and it turns out that the X25BT uses only SBC codec. For nearly a $200 headphone, that's simply astounding. We can now get Bluetooth headphones with all forms of aptX for about $70. And for a little bit more than $100, you can find at least one headphone that has LDAC. For under $100, you'll find headphones with aptX and noise cancellation. Compare the X25BT to the V-Moda M200 ANC. Both headphones are supposedly for professionals, but the M200 at least has aptX HD and AAC. The M200 is nearly $500, so I'm not remotely impressed with V-Moda's substandard codec support. The point I'm trying to make is that if companies are going to market professional Bluetooth headphones, then they should use higher quality Bluetooth codecs. So, when I look at the X25, I'm very confused. I just cannot find a legitimate excuse for using only SBC on a $200 headphone marketed for professionals. I mean, SBC is not even appropriate for non-professionals. It's the lowest codec with the least resolution and reliability. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. Perhaps the Bluetooth connection on the X25 might sound more pleasant to some compared to the wired connection, but it's a huge letdown in my view. Now, with respect to Bluetooth, the X25 has touch controls, all located on a vertical touch bar on the right ear cup. It's fairly responsive. Swiping up and down adjusts volume. You control all other aspects of playback using different combination of taps. I have no complaints about the touch controls, they just happen to work. Finally, there is no mobile application for the X25BT. I think Austrian Audio makes interesting products. They think outside the box and are not afraid to carve their own niche. The X15 and X65 are divisive headphones. That wasn't really Austrian Audio's fault. That was the problem of certain audiophiles who think every product should sound a particular way. Austrian Audio isn't designing headphones for the typical person. They don't make warm-sounding, bass-thumping products. But what Austrian Audio has been able to do thus far is produce headphones which are far more revealing than the vast majority of alternatives. While Audeze, Sennheiser, Audio-Technica, Yamaha, and many others boast about their respective headphones creating all the details, Austrian Audio actually tries to deliver. If you approach Austrian Audio headphones expecting HD6XX or LCD2 sound signatures, then don't be appalled to hear something different. I'm trying to underscore how you should see the Austrian Audio products. These are not normal gear. The X25BT falls in line with all of its other siblings. The X25 is a revealing headphone. Its performance, I found, is indistinguishable from the X15. Going back and forth, you would be hard-pressed to find any noticeable differences, I think. The X25 has a bass roll-off, similar to that of the X55, the X65, and the X15. The X25 has a sibilance and vocal push, just like these other headphones. It has a treble emphasis. It brings more clarity and detail than many other headphones, both below and above its price. This brings us to value. Why buy the X25BT if its performance and sound signature is the same as the cheaper X15? The only reason would be because of the various connection options the X25 has. If you don't need Bluetooth and USB connections, then the X15 is the better value, I think. I'm struggling a little bit about the X25BT. I'm not convinced that USB connection itself is sufficient justification for the price of the X25. If this headphone is aimed at professionals and audiophiles, then these groups already have amps and DACs for their gear, mitigating the need to have just USB-C connection. The Bluetooth connection is surprisingly limited on this headphone. Having only SBC codec is shocking. Not having a dedicated application is unfortunately par for the course. but the combination of the two failures, SBC and no Bluetooth app, makes the Bluetooth connection much less a notable feature and more of a specification to check on a list. I'm not remotely impressed by it. Is the X25BT value? Yes, but only if you want this sound signature and you want the various connection options. If you're not interested in Bluetooth and cannot see a driving need for USB connection, then the X15 is a better value, especially since the two products sound the same.